Hi everyone, I'm Mark Spitzig and I'm going to talk to you about outsourcing pharmaceutical manufacturing. In this presentation, I'm going to inform managers about the pharmaceutical industry, the drug creation process, and today's trends regarding these topics. I also want to we're going to look to discover the benefits that we can derive from outsourcing pharmaceutical manufacturing, as well as identifying the risks that are associated with outsourcing, and of course, how it's best to mitigate those risks. And lastly, I want to make a conclusion with recommendations for the managers as to my beliefs and whether or not the benefits outweigh the risks. Now I just want to move on and talk about the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry as a whole. It is a massive industry. The global revenue is approaching $1 trillion. There's a lengthy drug development process that has to be undertaken to develop the drugs and to go from initial discovery to actually producing and selling the product. The development time can actually take up to 20 years. And there's actually a very, very high rate of failure from that actually only 1 in 1,000 preclinical compounds actually make it to the clinical testing phase, which isn't even selling at that point, it's just to the actual testing phase. These blockbuster drugs, which are the large drugs that do make it through the process and get approved and are on sale, those drugs actually make up the majority of the profits for the drug companies. And that serves as recompense for the high failure rate, because again, if only 1 in 1,000 compounds are making it to even the clinical phase, there's a very, very low probability that an initial compound is going to make it to be one of these blockbuster drugs, and they have to compensate somehow. So there's a massive expense put into these, and they have to sell them for a massive profit to sort of mitigate the risks involved. And they also, in general, the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry, or the pharmaceutical industry in general, actually puts a lot into massive advertising expenditures. They expend a lot of funds on advertising because they only get these blockbuster drugs for a limited exclusivity window. That means that they only can sell these. They can be the only one to sell these for a short period of time, and in that time, they really advertise and push the drugs so that they can generate their revenue back from all the development costs. There are actually a variety of factors that are changing the industry today that are actually making it more difficult for a pharmaceutical industry to compete. And one of those is that the costs of development and discovery of new drugs is increasing. And that's due to a variety of reasons. That's due to tougher regulatory demands, the competition for patents among pharmaceutical companies. Larger clinical studies have to be required. There is, like I said, mentioned before, there is a very, very high rate of failure, and that is actually increasing. The rate of failure is increasing. And the new technologies are actually not panning out as well as they had hoped initially when they're trying to develop different new technologies. And the timelines, as mentioned before, are extremely long, and they're actually getting even longer. Additionally, we have other factors. One of the biggest factors that they're facing in general is the impending patent expiration of their blockbuster drugs. And this, in 2012, it was said that there was 40 brand name products that were losing patents from pharmaceutical companies with an estimated value of $35 billion in sales. $1 billion in sales from those 40 brand name projects that are actually losing protection. As mentioned before, there is an increasing time to market, so all these costs of time is increasing the time from the initial phase to the process, and every day, of course, that it extends costs more and more money. There are intellectual property concerns with who developed the drug first, because all these companies are going down the same genetic pathways and pathological pathways to try and develop these drugs, and there's a lot of concern with the intellectual property rights. There's an increasing generic drug market, so companies who produce knockoff products, so to speak, products that have the same active ingredients but aren't the Viagra of the drug, but they do have the same effect. And then there has been a steadily decreasing number of FDA approvals, so even the amount of drugs and pathways that are approved for these companies to work on and try to develop, there's a decreasing number of approvals, and there is a low public opinion of big pharma, the big pharmaceutical industry today. Now, let's examine, just as a quick rundown, the two types of pharmaceutical manufacturing firms that are typically being outsourced to. Not the giant pharmaceutical companies, but that manufacturing firms. And there are two main types. There are the API, which is active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturing. And then there's the contract clinical trial materials, which is abbreviated CTM. And we can see some of the companies, Ash Stevens Biopharma Solutions, Cambridge Major Laboratories would be specializing in your API, while your Jubilant, JHP, Patheon, and Metrics would be specializing in your CTM, or contract clinical trial materials manufacturing. So let's look at why firms would be looking to outsource their pharmaceutical manufacturing. You saw the challenge that they're facing today. There's a lot of upheaval in the industry today, in the pharmaceutical industry in general, and companies are looking for ways to of course decrease time to market, decrease time of production and research, and allow themselves to focus on what they do best. And so let's look at the benefits. As mentioned before, we can by outsourcing to different regions, or outsourcing to firms that have different manufacturing plants all over the world, you can actually gain and penetrate local markets. So you can, for example, develop a drug for use in more emerging markets like China and India, where it'll actually be manufactured over there. So it'll be a lot easier to gain and expand into those markets through outsourcing. It actually allows companies themselves to focus on their core competencies. So by outsourcing manufacturing and some maybe IT and some research aspects, they can actually focus on what they're good at, what they're best at, and that is, of course, the research and development they can solely focus on. And advertising is actually a core competency of most of these big pharma companies. They're good at that. They generate a lot of. They've already spent so much money to develop the drugs. They advertise them to obviously make sure that they have a constant profits revenue stream coming in. And of course, the big factor and big benefit of any outsourcing typically is the reduction of the drug development costs. And they say that it can reduce them by anywhere from 30 to 40%. So that's due to improved manufacturing efficiencies. If you're also shipping savings, if you are shipping a lot of drugs to companies overseas where you can now manufacture them overseas, there is efficiency with the drug approval and the regulatory process. If you're outsourcing that particular manufacturing process to a company, they're the ones who go through approvals. They have to get sort of approved and through the regulatory process. And of course, you get to minimize your capital intensive facilities. You don't need any manufacturing facilities if you're not doing the manufacturing. And of course, there isn't all these benefits without the possibility of there being some risks associated. And we can divide the risks into essentially two different categories: the business risks and the technical risks of outsourcing our manufacturing of the pharmaceuticals. And they all come down to the loss of control that you give up by outsourcing. And so if we look at the business aspect, the business risks, the main one is, of course, failing to meet deadlines. So whether you're outsourcing the certain aspects of IT or manufacturing, you're going to run into a possibility that you're not on the same page, the communication is not there, and you're not going to meet your deadline. And in this industry, you can actually have a loss of $23 million per day of sales if you aren't getting your product to market on time or as scheduled. Then, of course, we have the technical risks, which the industry in general has a very low tolerance for error, and that's because the misproduced products produced incorrectly can actually have adverse effects on people, on users, and that can result in medical issues and even death. And so you have lawsuits, and you have bad press, and you have all these other aspects that come along with that. And there has been research that has shown that increasing outsource has actually been linked to increase of drug recalls. There has been an increase of drug recalls, 309% increase in 2009, from 2008 to 2009, and 165 of those recalls were from the manufacturers outside the U.S., which are mostly outsourced manufacturing. Now, there is a lot of outsourced firms in the United States as well, but it's up 58% of those outside the U.S. And these two risks together make up the main technical risk. And now the main question is, of course, how do we mitigate these risks? How do we eliminate these risks if we can completely? And essentially, if you're outsourcing, the best way to mitigate any of these risks is to have a relationship and build a relationship with well and thoroughly researched outsourcing firms, well-known, companies with good reputations. And as you grow with the company, as you outsource and have a better experience with the company, it allows you to have more confidence in their timelines, in the communication, and also that their deadlines and what the product that they actually will produce. So by, of course, thoroughly vetting them at the beginning, and then as the relationship builds, it becomes easier and easier to trust them on their end to produce what they're looking for. So now, to make a final conclusion, we need to evaluate and balance the risks versus the benefits. And I do recommend outsourcing pharmaceutical manufacturing. The benefits, to me, far outweigh the risks. They far exceed the risks. And many of the risks actually can be partially or fully mitigated as you build a relationship and thoroughly vet your companies and your outsourcing partners over time. So this along with the benefits of emerging foreign markets, expanding into them, which are growing at a rate of more than 100 times those of developed markets, to get in them on the ground floor right at the beginning. Also to outsource facilities, so you don't really need to have the initial capital outlay to have these and expand manufacturing plants and processes. And of course, the increasing costs of expiring patents and the time, all these factors make it almost a necessity to focus on to not focus on the manufacturing process and allow that to be outsourced, but to actually get back to what we do best as a for industry, and that would be to focus on our core competencies of advertising and research and development. Thank you for your time.